Hey, everybody, just wanted to give a quick heads up with this episode. Some of the things that we mentioned are referencing the current pandemic, COVID-19, that's going out right now. So if anybody is coming into this later and kind of wondering what we're talking about, it's relating to that current event that's going on right now. So just want to let you know and enjoy the episode. Hey everybody, Andrew here, hoping that you're well, staying healthy, and ready for another episode of Indie Game Movement, the podcast that talks about the marketing and business of indie games. This is episode 121, where we're going to be talking about how indie devs can build their brand with the right mindset and goals. Now, during pre-dev and early stages of development, there is a lot that indie devs need to focus on and be aware of outside of just making their game. That also means a lot of distractions can arise, making it a challenge to keep a pulse on the market and build their brand. That's why our guest today will be sharing how indie devs can identify objectives, create goals, and establish a strong foundation in the early stages of their brand so they have the right mindset and course to follow. So that's what we're going to be talking about right here today on Indie Game Movement. Hey everybody, and we're back, and today I have Michel Money. It's Money, correct?
Yeah, you can call me Mike.
Mike, okay. I got Mike with me today, and and he's here to provide us some really good, helpful stuff. But Mike, how have you been doing and everything?
I'm doing good, all things considered. I mean, we're hunkering down because the whole situation right now, I'm sure you're doing just the same. First, thanks for having me, by the way.
Of course.
I would say, things are trending well, business-wise and everything. We're pretty lucky. We're feeling blessed. I hope that people are staying safe and whatnot. But we're not really sensing it here just yet.
Okay, cool. Well, that's definitely good to know that things aren't too affected yet, but you're, staying safe and everything else. So before we get into the conversation, though, I'd love for you to share a little bit more about, what you do. I know that you have a lot of expertise in the gaming industry and everything else, and you kind of have you wear two hats, and one's running your own company, but then you have another endeavor that you get into that helps indie devs with the work that they're doing. But share a little bit more about your company and such first.
Sure. So I've started my own studio in 2017 after freelancing for about 10 years on and off, and it was meant to be a company that would help indies develop their own games and whatnot. But it is true to say that for a much longer period of time, I've been freelancing as a consultant to do just the same thing. So the company that we have, Cathar Games, is essentially on the development side for the most part. And the consulting gig that I have is mostly to help people with the, business development phase and just general consulting about how not to step into certain traps or pitfalls that people typically fall into. They're not necessarily merging, but they're closer apart than they used to be because I'm doing more and more of that to help our ongoing clients on the Cathar game side. So there's kind of a blurred line here, but I'm still doing it outside of the business simply because economics at play are making it more affordable for newcomers to the scene. And this is something I'm very passionate about, is helping new creatives get to the industry and actually deliver something. So yeah, that's in a nutshell, that's what we do.
All right, cool. Well, thank you for providing a little bit more insight about that. And, before we get into kind of the meat of our discussion here, I'm going to put you through the Q box round. And,
let's do it.
Are you ready? Okay, good. Yeah. All right. And for those of you who aren't familiar with the Q box round, it's just basically a series of random questions. We ask Mike here, and he's just going to give us a quick and easy answer. So we're going to get it right into it with first, Star Wars or Star Trek?
Star Trek.
All right. Early bird or night owl?
Night owl.
What motivates you every day?
Family.
Nice. What country have you always wanted to travel to?
Oh, God. England.
Okay. And what's been one of your greatest learning experiences?
Game jams.
Game jams. Nice. All right. So that is it for the Q box round. I'll have to say, Mike, you kind of just like just lasered like right through that. That's awesome.
Yeah, well, you told me a few words, right? So
you got it.
Simple.
Awesome. All right. So this time, what we're gonna do is kind of take things a little bit differently. So, so for any listeners, this being a new episode for you, for our first episode, we usually have a particular format where we have a bunch of discussion topics and stuff. But this time, I figured it'd be fun to take things a little bit different and kind of role play a little bit. So, based off of Mike's expertise and what he helps provide indie devs with, I'm going to kind of assume, to an extent, the role of like a game studio. And so we're just so Mike, I'm approaching you here with just RenGen Studios. That's my company name, and I'm currently building an action platformer. I have a really small team. I only have a team about like 3 people, and right now, I mean, I'm just kind of early in development stages, but I'm thinking big and thinking ahead in terms of I know I'm probably going to have to grow the team, implement a lot of other things in development at some point in time. I know I'm going to have to like get funding, but honestly, I'm kind of all over the place because this is fairly new to me. Trying to get these like systems, processes. I mean, there's probably a lot that I can go into, but I'm let's just say I'm approaching you saying like, hey, look, I'm really trying to get my feet off the ground, have a good foundation in terms of the business, my and how I'm creating my company here. What is a good way to kind of get started, and what are the things that I need to go from this process?
Let me preface this sort of out of role here, break the fourth wall, and say big part of my work as part of the consulting gig is asking questions.
Okay.
There are very few set answers to every situation. Honestly, it's more about digging down and understanding the purpose, the objectives, the situation, the strengths and weaknesses. So a big part of my work when I'm approaching prospect clients, people that want to have make a new game, whatnot, is technically about answering a lot, and I do mean a lot of questions, and not just dropping the bomb and say here are 20 questions I need answered to, but more like I need feedback on the first question to know where to take it from there. So think of it like as a hierarchy, a tree of questions essentially that we're going to dig down depending on the situation. The one that I feel is most compelling and most important, especially early in discussion, is why you're making the game. And it's a very broad one, but it's a very important one because some people are more, I would say, there's a commercial pursuit or there's an intellectual pursuit, a creative pursuit, essentially. It really matters to me why the game is being created, because if you're going to make a game for profit,
right,
it's a very different approach to if you're going to make something that's for a legacy, a niche type of game that's just for legacy purposes. So I would lead with that. Why are you making that particular game?
Okay, so a great way to kind of, like you already said, is like if I'm coming to you and be like, hey, look, I got this great idea and everything. I know it's going to make me a ton of money. Would you maybe not necessarily say it's a red flag, but would you kind of say, hey, maybe that's something you can reconsider? And then you probably ask a series of other questions. Is like, okay, money is important, but what are the other factors behind that?
I wouldn't say it's not so much about being judgmental, although I will admit that oftentimes I'm less enthused about working on a project where the primary purpose is money, because I feel like there's a lot of these companies that are doing well, especially in the mobile landscape. So I don't feel I can really contribute that much if that's the sole, the primary directive, should I say.
Yep.
So it's not so much about being judgmental and choosing projects and so on and so forth. It has more to do about filtering down what's relevant to get there, because every situation, the reason why you make the game is going to change drastically the path how to get there. Mm-hmm. For example, if you're not looking for money, if you're looking for something that's a very personal thing, I just want to express the situation that profoundly affected me, and I want to make an indie game that is going to communicate something that I can't put in words, and people are going to feel that. I'm probably going to advise, later on to say we should stick to a smaller team for as long as possible, so that that idea doesn't become blurred, because there's more creative input from the original ID creator. Whereas if there's an actual concept a lot of people rally around because, say, it's a love letter to a particular genre, then a lot of people can instantly get the vision. Then you can scale that team much faster, for example.
Okay. So I think a good example in this too is like, let's say, I mean, everybody, it seems like that's in this is really passionate and everything, right? Um, and one that I come across a lot too is everything, retro, or it's based off of retro games, or the games that we grew up with in the 80s in our childhood and everything. So when you come across someone like that, what are some other questions to go from there? I just want to go on a little tangent there and other things that come up because like you said, smaller teams are probably a better area to go into that because, I mean, you're also looking at potentially a smaller demographic, so to speak, or an audience. So what are the types of things that like I should consider or be aware of if I have that small team and I'm really focused on the games that I grew up with during my childhood?
So it's a bit away from the business discussion per se, but it's also something that as part of my consulting gig I do is I look at the creative versus the actual market landscape for that. Oftentimes you're going to find these games that you grew up with and may or may not have a future today. So let me take a few examples here. Turn-based RPGs have been done a lot, especially pixel turn-based RPGs. Now, there are some of them that are still going to survive today, but they're not as innovative. So it could be a tough market. Don't get me wrong, there's still a lot of room for them, especially if you reach a certain bar in terms of the visual quality specifically and the music as well. But it can be a tough market. Similarly, if you're going to go with something like an action RPG, you might find that the quality bar has been raised to a certain level where, say, if you can't beat Zelda: Link to the Past, why bother? Mm-hmm. But then if you go to something like 2D platformers, that's where you're going to fall against the bulk of the competition. There's a ton of them, and if you actually look at the actual numbers behind that, that's where you're least likely to actually make your money back. There's been way too many platformers, and if you look at the trends there, it's very hard to break even compared to, say, even turn-based RPGs have enough of a market niche to basically buy everything that comes out that's a certain level of quality. So you probably still, even today, have more chance of breaking even with a turn-based RPG than, say, a platformer. And so that's an important point of data if you're making this game, because we used to make these games back when I was a kid, and so I want to make one such game. I might seek to not necessarily polarize, but sort of bring you to the attention that there's such a thing as a market landscape, and sales are actually far more predictable than most people make them out to be. Mm-hmm. And unfortunately, or fortunately rather, the market is built in such a way that you need to achieve a certain level of success with your first game if you're going to make more. So part of asking why you make the game is also, are you trying to build a team for the long haul or just the one project? Because if you're only trying to make the one project, the fact that it may not turn up a profit is fine. But if you're trying to build a team first and foremost that happens to make these types of games, then it sort of leads into, can we make sure that there's a market for what you're doing?
Okay, so that's a really interesting point too, because part of me earlier was thinking like, oh, well, what if some people are like, oh, shoot, I'm getting into the wrong, genre or style of game or whatever, and you're basically saying that regardless of that's not really the point, because there's always going to be friction or a challenge to whatever niche that you're in, and you shouldn't base it off of how easy it is. What really matters more than anything is what that future plan is, because in time, even if you break even or don't make anything at all, if the game plan is, let's say, I want to make 3, 5, whatever number of games, and this is going to be an actual, kind of a long-term commitment that I'm making here, that's more important than necessarily what you're making, especially if you have, that understanding and kind of the passion to back and motivation to back all that. Is that correct?
Well, the way I would put it, it's not necessarily better or worse. I would say that, and this is from a very creative standpoint, there's only so many types of game that you get excited to make. So trying to force you to make something that's trendy but is not within that realm is sort of counterintuitive, because you're not going to be extremely successful at that. So I'm working from the standpoint that you're making games you're passionate about, and then the trends will either amplify or not the outcome. So if you're actually good at making a certain particular game, and it's a good time to do it, you'll get more sales out of it but regardless, it was the type of game that you were good to make. I don't actually believe, and this is more from the position of belief, I guess, that people can make any game. I don't buy that game designers can make